We are surrounded by complexity. Both the natural and the human-made world are boundless vistas of complexity. But where does complexity come from? And what is complexity exactly? These are surprisingly challenging questions. Complexity tends to be one of those I know it when I see it kind of things. For example, here are some containers of simple substances. 4 liters of water, about a kilogram of carbon, 200 grams of nitrogen, 100 grams of calcium, 60 or so of phosphorus, 25 grams of potassium, some little vials of sulfur, sodium chloride, and magnesium, and a very small vial with a select blend of a couple dozen other minerals. You would probably describe this collection as highly ordered, but not exactly complex. If I were to stir all of these together into a mineral soup, then the collection of substances would be completely disordered, but it would still not be complex. Kind of boring, really, like some sort of seawater broth. But now, have a look at this baby. It weighs about 6 kilograms and is made up of exactly the same substances I just showed you. The baby is very complex. So complex that there's still a huge amount we don't yet know about how it all works. How can these substances, so uninteresting by themselves and even more boring when just mixed together, somehow be bound together through natural processes into something unfathomably complex? If you guessed the answer has something to do with energy and the laws of thermodynamics, you'd be right. Consider what the baby does, compared to the vials of minerals and jar of water, or in comparison to the seawater broth. The vials and the broth just sit there, but the baby is a constant flow of energy. It nurses and energy goes in. That energy is put to work in myriad ways, developing, growing, and maintaining the body, producing heat and movement, and somehow taking in and processing a vast amount of sensory data into perception, learning, and memory. The baby is a constant flux of energy through matter, and the work that is performed by that energy on the material constituents of the baby is precisely what produces all of that complexity. But why does it produce complexity? Where exactly does the complexity itself come from? Well, it comes from rules. It's because of rules. That is, it's owing to the fact that energy can only flow in accordance with rules. Remember that the universe is constantly trying to eliminate energy gradients, seeking thermal equilibrium. But the energy has to flow through matter to get there, and that means it has to obey matter's rules. For example, for the chemical energy in baby's milk to be released, it can't just burst into flame like a match, because that's not how milk does things. Instead, it has to be digested by enzymes into a form that the baby's cells can use to release the energy contained within it. Radiation from the sun, if it happens to strike a chloroplast in the green leaf of a plant, can only continue on its path to equilibrium by being converted to an energy-storing carbohydrate, because that is the rule that is imposed on the energy by the physical characteristics of the chloroplast itself. To see how rules create complexity, consider a simple game invented by mathematician John Conway in 1970. It's called Life. It's played on a grid of squares that is considered to be boundless in every direction. A square can be either colored in or not. If it is, we say it is alive, and if it is not colored in, we say it is dead. The game is played in turns and works like this. In each turn, a live cell can either continue as a live cell or die, and a dead cell can continue as a dead cell or come to life, and these outcomes are always determined by the state of each cell's 8 neighbors. If a dead square has exactly 3 live neighbors, then it comes alive in the next turn. If a live square has 2 or 3 live neighbors, it remains alive in the next turn. A live cell with fewer than 2 live neighbors dies of loneliness, and a live cell with more than 3 live neighbors dies of overcrowding. In each turn, the outcomes for all the cells are calculated, and then all of them updated simultaneously. That's it. Dead simple, right? But some surprising things can happen, depending on the pattern we start with. For example, this pattern is called a walker. Watch what happens as we step through 4 turns. We're back to the pattern we started with, but it's in a slightly different place. A repeating pattern that moves. If we just start out with a few randomly colored-in squares and let it go, then usually nothing much happens. The patterns either self-destruct or become still lifes or repeat themselves. But occasionally something strange happens. The patterns grow and become more complex, and keep growing and getting more complex, sometimes for a very long time, sometimes forever. The patterns can bear a startling resemblance to something actually alive. This example illustrates some key concepts about complexity. First, fundamental to the idea of the life game is that the state of the board at any given time completely determines what will happen next. You don't need to know anything else about the prior state of the game. Knowing the rules and the present state of the board is all you need. Systems like this are said to be dynamic. The only input to the system is the state of the system itself, and the system's own rules determine what happens next. The second key idea is actually a consequence of the fact that complex systems are dynamic. It's not an obvious consequence. In fact, it was only just worked out by mathematicians like Alan Turing about 80 years ago, and it hasn't altogether worked its way into the popular culture even yet. Remember that one of the fruits of science is the ability to make predictions. Knowing the elevation of a cannon and the muzzle velocity of the cannonball, we can use a simple formula to tell us how many seconds until it lands and more or less exactly where it will land without even shooting it. Knowing the relative speeds, trajectories, and masses of the Earth, Moon, and Sun, we can name the precise dates hundreds of years from now when there will be a solar or lunar eclipse. We just use a, well, not so simple formula, but still it's a formula. What characterizes a truly complex system is that you can't predict its behavior. What I mean is that predicting its behavior is known to be actually impossible. It's not that we haven't found the right formulas yet. It's that we've found that no such formulas can possibly exist. Consider the life game. We know that the state of the board for each turn completely determines the next turn. That means, starting with the initial configuration, that the state of the board in every turn thereafter is determined. But there's no single method you can use that will predict how the board will unfold from any given starting configuration. This oddity, the property of being both completely determined and fundamentally unpredictable, is characteristic of complex dynamical systems. When I said there's no method to predict how the board will unfold, that doesn't mean there's no way to find out how it will unfold. Simply let the game run and see what happens. But that is the only method. There's no formula or mathematical function into which we can feed the initial configuration and out of which will come answers like, it enters a loop in 2,000 turns, or it spawns a stream of walkers. The only way you can reliably know whether some random configuration dies out in 2,000 turns is to let it run until it dies out, or for 2,000 turns, whichever comes first. The only way you can know if a game spawns a stream of walkers is to watch it unfold until it either spawns a stream of walkers or it falls into a loop of configurations that doesn't. But remember, We know that there are patterns that don't die out and that don't fall into a repeating loop. Instead, they make new patterns forever, so you might be watching for a very long time. Conway's life game proves that complexity can arise any time the work that energy does is constrained by rules that themselves need not be complicated, that can even be dead simple. This suggests that such complexity should be everywhere we look, and indeed it is. Have you ever noticed that nobody tries to predict what the weather will be in your hometown 3 weeks from Tuesday? It's because it can't be done. The weather is a dynamical, complex system. So is the climate as a whole, something we'll be talking about a lot in future videos. The stock market is dynamically complex, which is why there's no formula to reliably tell you how to make money by choosing the right stocks. Murmurations of starlings are complex, as are the patterns that honey makes when it flows onto itself. And so are traffic patterns in a network of roads, which is why it is impossible to design the perfect pattern of traffic lights to prevent traffic jams. Perhaps most importantly, human society itself is dynamically complex, and therefore so are the economies and the civilizations that human societies build, especially ours. So everything we've noted about complex systems is true of civilization too. It is dynamic, and it is fundamentally unpredictable. For these reasons, it is impossible for any person or any group of people to impose their will to determine what course it shall take. It is even impossible for anyone to know with any confidence exactly how it will unfold in the future. There are a couple of other features of complexity we need to take notice of. The life game is an abstraction, but it's one we can make real by programming a computer to play it. When we do so, it is the electricity in the integrated circuitry that provides the exergy, doing the work of calculating the next state of the board from the rules and updating it on the screen. Efficiently programmed, the computer will not use much electricity for small patterns. But as the patterns grow, the number of calculations that must be made for each turn increases. The computer will draw ever more electricity and give off more heat in consequence. This is general. Complex systems tend to unfold along pathways that maximize the amount of exergy they consume. This is called the maximum entropy production principle. And it explains, for example, why, given enough energy, wind currents will tend to organize themselves into vortices, like tornadoes and cyclones. That's the configuration that maximizes the flow of energy, and therefore maximizes the rate at which the energy gradient is reduced. The second point to take notice of is this. Suppose we have a large, complex life game going, and we just randomly insert a few live cells, like this. The complexity collapses, as if consumed by a firestorm of random interactions. This, too, is general. Complex systems tend to form ever more elaborate structures to consume as much exergy as possible. However, the larger and more complex a system becomes, the more fragile it tends to be. And the larger and more complex a system becomes, the farther it has to fall when the complexity collapses. This, too, is a theme that will echo throughout this series, because it is a feature universally observed in the collapse both of ecosystems and of civilizations. In our next video, we'll examine specifically the role that energy plays in civilizational complexity and discover what the real causes were that made our own civilization so unique in human history. As always, thank you for watching.